Number 2. This is really a science question. It could very easily show up on the science test because science and math are very closely related. Ohms are a measure of resistance, amperes are a measure of current, and volts are a measure of voltage. The relationship among these three quantities is represented by the given formula, where ohms equals volts divided by amperes. So let me take a minute and just break this down in terms I can understand. Ohms are a measure of resistance. Amperes are a measure of current. And volts are a measure of voltage. So we have 3 different factors involved in this equation. And if you look at the relationship to the formula, you can see that it is also the same 3 quantities. And ohms is here. So those 3 factors are consistent in the formula and in the story. So I think the best way for me to explain this is to set up a table. So I'm going to draw myself, I'm going to try to, a table form. I am using a new version of GoodNotes, and it is a little bit tricky. So let's make some rows. We'll make a row for the header. I will make a row for each of those quantities. So let's do one for ohms, amperes, and volts. So in this first column, let's put the, I'm going to call it a variable because that's the proper name for it. So we have ohms. We have, and I'm in the habit of capitalizing ohms. I think they should be. We have amperes, and we have volts. And then let's go ahead and say what is measured. What does each of these variables measure? So this is what is measured. And this is important. When I start to solve this problem, I'm going to need to know these things. So I'll look back up here. Ohms is a measure of resistance. Amperes are a measure of current. And volts are measures of voltage. And then I need 2 more columns here, because we're going to actually put our math problem in this table so that we can understand it. All right. A 150 ohm load. So they're telling me that the ohm is 150. Is connected to a 300 volt source. So 300 goes with volts. The thing that we don't know in this first scenario is the number of amperes. So I'm going to call this the first scenario. You could call it the first story. And let's go ahead and find this missing number of amperes. So remember, the formula is ohms equals volts over amperes. So ohms, that's 150. Volts is 300, and we're looking for the number of amperes. That's what we're about to find. So to solve this problem, I'm going to multiply both sides by A, and that will allow me to cancel this A. And of course, I did not leave myself enough room. So let's bring this down. So we're left with 150A on this side and 300 on this side. So if I divide both sides by 150, the correct amperage for this one will be 2 amps. So I'm going to put that 2 right there. So I have used that first part of the story and the formula to fill in this first scenario column. And then they changed the story on me. If the source is changed to 250 volts, so this becomes the second scenario or the second situation. If the source is changed to 250 volts, what must the resistance, okay, so I'm looking for resistance, that's the number of ohms. What must the resistance become to ensure that the current stays the same? So the current is not going to change. It's going to stay at 2. And now we are looking for this number, and our formula will help us find it. So let's set up a formula down here. Same thing, of ohms equals volts over amps. And this time we don't know the ohms, but we do know the volts, and we do know the amps. This is the letter O. Let me not use the letter O. Well, I'm just going to write the word out. That looks too much like a 0. Let me just write the word out. Ohms equals 250 divided by 2. So the number of ohms in this situation is 125. So that would be the missing number in scenario 2. So the answer I'm looking for is C. That is a good question. I'm guessing that would be listed as a hard question. I'm not really sure, but there's a lot to do with that one. One suggestion I have when you have those kinds of problems is make yourself a table. Organize that information so that you can understand it as you work through it a step at a time. Good question, and it could be on the science test.